7 years since Houthi militia coup, Yemen is in utter chaos and a complete devastation. United Nations Special Envoy concludes visit to Oman while Tim Litter King returns to Riyadh. The joint forces take up fierce clashes with Houthi rebels in different fronts in Hodeidah. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is the English news with me, SHAZA ABDELBAKI. 7 years of the Houthi rebels and control of the capital Sana'a, Yemen is struggling to stand on its feet. The war has worsened the economic and the humanitarian situation in the country, with 40% of families losing their basic income and around 20 million need food and shelter. More on the story is within this report.
A lot of water ran in the river of Yemen since the Houthi rebels captured the capital Sana'a on the 21st of September 2014. Back then, they entered the capital and controlled government institutions in a silent moment in the history of Yemen. Since that moment, the country entered a new vicious circle of violence and collapse. On the political side, the country is divided between a government that steers the wheel from outside, led by President ABDELBAKI Mansour Hadi, and the Houthi rebels who control parts of the country in the northwest, in addition to the capital. Peace in Yemen knows nowhere, with fighting flares in every front, between the resistance in the Red Sea coast and the rebels. Fighting between the rebels too and the government forces is flaring in Ma'rib and other areas in the north and south of the country. The Houthi rebels try to penetrate the lines of the government forces in Ma'rib to control a vital location in the country that will give them semi-full control. They violate the Stockholm Accord in Hodeidah by their infiltration attempts and their daily shelling of civilians. The political chaos, the indecisive military solution, the involvement of foreign actors, and the inaction of the international community all nurture the continuation of conflict. The Houthis, for their part, looks for the Imami ruling. They force Yemenis to retreat back to the past days of the last century, before the revolution. For that end, they control the Yemeni livelihoods, or drive them to a standstill. The rebels even are controlling the flow of humanitarian aid that is donated to Yemeni people from outside to feed around 20 million who are on the brink of famine. Corruption and illicit gains out of humanitarian aid is on the rise. Reports say that the economy of war drove a number of Yemenis to hoard lots of money allocated in essence to the poor. According to reports, Houthis amassed no less than 1.8 billion of state's finances to fund their war for control. Sources in the capital reveal that Houthis are behind the disruption in the foreign exchange rate after they controlled the government finances, which drove inflation in the country to rising digits. This fact could be added to the fake banknotes, the differentiation in the rate of the local currency, and the continued money washing and arms purchase. The one who suffers out of all that is the Yemeni poor citizen who is swinging between the parties and who doesn't have even the basic needs that makes him able to continue a human life. In the end, after 7 years of Houthi rebellious control of the capital Sana'a, the country had the worst humanitarian crisis in the world.
The United Nations envoy Hans Grunberg ended his visit to Muscat as part of his efforts to revive the stalled political process in Yemen. During the visit, Grunberg met with a Houthi militia negotiator on his first tour to the region that was started from the Saudi capital, Riyadh. U.S. envoy Tim Litter King returned to Riyadh on Tuesday after 2 days of intensive talks led by the new United Nations envoy Hans Grunberg in the Omani capital Muscat. According to the Saudi press agency, Litter King discussed with Saudi Minister of State for Foreign Affairs Adel Jubeir recent developments in Yemen, in addition to exchanging views on the issues of common interest. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights expressed concern over the situation in Yemen. The spokesperson of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights repeated that the conflict in Yemen continues to engage in violations of international law with the little regard for basic rule of law principles. The world celebrates the International Day of Peace today, the 21st September, while Yemen is still under the iron hold of the Houthi militia. More on what the country has been through witnessing during these years is within this report.
September 21st is the International Day of Peace, in which the world celebrates the end of wars and conflicts and the flourishing of coexistence principle. It is also the same day that the Houthi militia overthrew the government in Yemen and started a coup that ignited the war and destroyed Yemen with what they call the September 21st Revolution. The coup of the Houthi militia in Yemen 7 years ago left enormous destruction on social, economic and political levels. More than 200,000 have been killed due to war. 2/3 of the country's population live on the aid provided by relief agencies, while the United Nations warns of a looming famine with 5 million people a step away from it. The militia justified the coup to reduce the prices of gasoline from 100 riyals per liter to 75 riyals. Today, they sell 1 liter for 600 riyals. They also pushed 20 million people below the poverty line. In this regard, the United Nations' latest report confirmed that humanitarian aid has reached only half of those 20 million Yemenis. Relief agencies' data shows that war triggered by the militias caused the displacement of 4 million people inside the country and about 1 million outside of it, and that 80% of the internally displaced are females and children living in camps that lack the most basic humanitarian needs. Meanwhile, 2 million students were unable to enroll in education because the militias used more than 2,000 schools for military purposes, or because some schools have been homes for displaced. Further, Houthi militia kidnapped more than 20,000 civilians and recruited more than 50,000 children. They also closed all independent and opposition media outlets, seized private facilities and companies, and blew up more than 1,000 homes belonging to their opponents. The outcomes of the so-called September 2000 revolution varied with its violations against civilians. Traders have been affected most by imposing on them donations. It seems that the outcomes and goals of the September coup are to destroy the country and target Yemeni society in all its forms. The majority of businessmen in Houthi militia-controlled areas suffer from such assault, despite all they provide under blackmail and threats of material support to the militia under the name of war effort and the imposition of an official levies and royalties. Since 2014, Houthi destruction was not an individual behavior of a number of militia leaders, but rather a systematic and organized work that the militia deliberately undertake to grab peace from Yemenis.
In Hodeidah, the military media of the joint forces announced that they had achieved direct casualties among the Houthi militia. This came after the joint forces fired back of Houthi artillery that targeted civilians in Al-Durayhimi. Turning to Hais, the joint forces thwarted a new attack by the Houthi rebels south of Hodeidah and inflicted heavy losses among them. The sources said the joint forces confronted Houthi advances and inflicted with heavy losses, causing deaths and injuries among them, while the rest managed to flee. A military source in Shabwa said that a large military reinforcements arrived to support the government forces in their confrontation with the Houthi militia in Bayhan. The sources added that the tribes of Shabwa announced a general mobilization to support the government forces and resistance. Meanwhile, Bayhan and Ain witnessed a massive attack by the Houthi militia this morning. Government forces took back military sites controlled by Houthi militia in Al-Jawf. Ministry of Defense said that their forces carried out a surprising attack on Houthi positions in Canal and Al-Khanjar fronts. The military operation managed to liberate the sites with direct strikes that inflicted heavy losses on the Houthis. In Hadramaut, an army officer was injured in an explosion in Al-Qatan district. Sources reported that anonymous men planted an explosive device next to a market in the district. Sources stated that the forces tried to dismantle the device, but it exploded soon and the officer was seriously wounded. Coming next. University professors continue to suffer, especially with their salaries unpaid.
المدرسة ثالثتي على منطقة الروضة، استهدف الأطفال الأبرياء اللي يلعبوا في الشارع، يدعي للسلام يقول له للسلام يقتل أطفالنا، يقتل أطفالنا الأبرياء.
أنا قلت افتجعت ولا قلنا يلقى واحد صاروخ ثاني، طلعت البيت حقنا. عشان ألعب أنا وأصحابي والصاروخ الطرح.
Welcome back. The ongoing war and hard economic situation have hit many sectors in Yemen. University professors are not far from the hard situation. They have not been paid for more than 3 years. This has aggravated their lives. More on the story is within this report.
University professors in the Houthi-controlled areas are facing problems and debts, which left them no choice but to threat to go on strikes, disrupting the new academic year. All faculty members and their assistants in 8 universities in northern Yemen haven't been receiving their salaries for more than 5 years, said an official of a faculty syndicate. The militia forces academics to work, preventing the issuance of protest statements from the unions under their control, the faculty syndicate official in northern Yemen said. This has caused severe suffering to academics, university employees and their families, and left a negative impact on the educational process despite its apparent continuation over the past years. Houthis refused to pay the salaries of academics despite their suffering, which prompted a number of them to sell their homes and belongings and to borrow in order to pay their simplest obligations. Most university professors are unable to facilitate their lives. Some are living in debt and are unable to pay the rent of their houses, while some started working in other jobs, and some migrated to villages in search for a job opportunity. Professors complain about their low wages, which do not meet the simplest living requirements due to the high prices and economic inflation resulting from the collapse of the national currency, which has made the salary lose more than half of its value. A professor in a Yemeni university gets about $250 a month, while a teaching assistant's salary drops to $80 a month. Non-payment of salaries coupled with difficult security conditions has caused dozens of academics to leave Yemen or to move to other governorates in search for a better living. Houthis have replaced competent academics with elements affiliated to them that lack the qualifications and degrees required to occupy such positions. This has largely disrupted the educational quality and caused unprecedented decline in the ranking of Yemeni universities in world university rankings. The Houthi militia threatened dozens of professors at Sana'a University and other universities with dismissal if they did not attend, despite the interruption of their salaries for years. The sources pointed out that the militia forced the academics to teach without salaries or even pay transportation fees and threatened them with dismissal and replacement with members of the group or its loyalists if they did not respond. According to the sources, most of those who have been appointed do not meet the conditions of appointment and have failed in the bachelor's from 6 to 7 subjects, while some have no qualifications other than loyalty to militia, the dynasty, and the hateful sectarian racist ideology. The Houthi militia continues to monitor education and the public function of the state as part of its continuous efforts to seize all aspects of administrative and professional work, especially in the educational process. There could be no future for academics in a country ruled by militia.
The United Nations officials said about 8 million people in Yemen need services to treat malnutrition. The Office of United Nations Humanitarian Coordinator in Yemen stated that out of 7.6 million Yemenis need treatment of acute malnutrition. Further, the United Nations World Food Programme warned that food aid stocks are running out, calling on donors to help their pledges. The program called upon donors to quickly pay funds so that the program can continue providing life-saving assistance. The UN has repeatedly warned that some of its agencies could suspend their work in Yemen due to the lack of funding. This can have severe consequences. More on this story is within this report.
Humanitarian partners in Yemen warn the United Nations of serious consequences if it proceeds with the decision to reduce relief programs, especially food aid, water support, and the health sector. This could lead to the death of thousands of malnourished and sick children. Further, they pointed out that the country's population increased during the war years by an amount of 6 million people, and with it increased humanitarian needs. The letter addressed to David Gressly, the United Nations Humanitarian Coordinator in Yemen, came in response to his August 30 statement, in which he indicated that as of this September, some agencies may limit important programs, including water, health, and other sectors due to lack of funding. The message of the humanitarian partners in Yemen urged the United Nations to assume its responsibilities towards the millions of Yemenis who depend on these vital programs and projects, as the international organization has other options to fulfill its humanitarian and moral obligations. Civil society organizations working in partnership with UN organizations on the relief side affirmed that the consequences of reducing the programs of United Nations agencies will be catastrophic in terms of interruption of health services, cutting off water supplies, and the possible death of thousands of sick children. They stated that Yemen is now in the 7th year of the start of the civil conflict, and an entire generation of nearly 6 million Yemenis was born during the conflict, which indicates an increase in humanitarian needs. According to the organizations, donor countries should increase their humanitarian assistance in proportion to the requirements of resilience programs. This is important to mitigate the negative impact of a sudden future decline in humanitarian funding. Humanitarian partners in Yemen indicated that due to the restrictions imposed on the port of Hodeidah and the closure of the Taiz Road, the Sana'a-Ma'rib Road, and the Sana'a Airport, which serves nearly 60% of the population, the cost of basic life-saving humanitarian needs has increased due to the complications imposed by the parties to the war on imports. 22.2 million Yemenis need some kind of humanitarian assistance this year, and that humanitarian needs have received only 40% of the necessary funding. About 11.1 million people do not receive aid, and the number of people who need some kind of humanitarian assistance is about 5 times the population of Paris, and the humanitarian situation requires a real economic and diplomatic commitment to alleviate the disaster. Local partners called for building strategic partnerships between local and international organizations and United Nations agencies through long-term projects and increasing the number of representatives of the country team from 3 to 5 members, in addition to increasing the number of the humanitarian advisory team from 2 to 5 representatives so that they are chosen democratically and transparently by civil society organizations.
The National Committee Against Coronavirus announced 51 new cases of the COVID-19. Committee officials said on Twitter that 20 cases were recorded in Hadramaut, 7 in Ma'rib, 13 in Aden, 7 in Shabwa, and 4 in Baida. Also, 6 deaths were recorded, plus 24 recovered cases. The total cases are 8,718, including 1,649 deaths. Here's a reminder of the main headlines. 7 years since Houthi militia coup, Yemen is in utter chaos and a complete devastation. United Nations Special Envoy concludes visit to Oman, while Tim Luther King returns to Riyadh. The joint forces take up fierce clashes with Houthi rebels and different fronts in Hodeidah. This is the end of the news. Thank you for watching.